So this last month at Harvester Christian Church, we've been doing this series called My Secret Heart. And during this series, we've been talking about those places of our heart that we want to root out. And this last weekend, the topic that Pastor Doyle talked about was prejudice and racism. And I thought I'd give you a few seconds, a few minutes of my story and my history with prejudice and racism, both how I've experienced it and also how I've had prejudice in my heart towards other people as well. And I thought, what better place to do it than at the place of the Dred Scott case, historical case that set off the Civil War. So for those of you who don't know me, I am about a half Mexican. My dad is 100% Mexican. His name is Sacramento Castro Perez Jr. He grew up not knowing English. He had to learn English in order to go to school. So I'm half Mexican. That's why my last name is Perez. But I'm also a little bit of Native American. My mother, Native American, comes from her side of the family. My mom was really into the Native American culture, and so that's why she named me Nokomis. And actually the name comes from the poem of Hiawatha. Nokomis is actually Hiawatha's grandmother's name, so that's right. I have a girl's name. Thanks, Mom. When I was young, I grew my hair out really long, and if you're lucky, I'll remember to put a picture of that in the comment section below, so make sure you check that out. But I had really long hair. Our family went around to Shriner hospitals, and we went around to different cultural festivities, and we actually participated in Native American powwows. I never grew up in the church when I was a little kid, but what I did grow up in was the Native American cultural youth group kind of stuff. So there's a whole bunch of us young kids who we grew our hair out and we put on the Native American dress and we went around to powwows, and that was really my first experience with prejudice and racism, where I would get made fun of a lot. Number one, for my hair and for the things that I wore. I wore moccasins to school, I wore Native American shirts to school, had long hair. I remember this one kid, Eric, he made it his goal to pick on me, to pull my hair, to make fun of me for being Native American. And that was really a lot of my elementary years. And we would also go to these festivities, and a lot of the people, they were excited about it because they obviously went to the festival knowing that they were going to see Native Americans dancing. And so they were okay with it, but then there was also a lot of people who were not exactly thrilled with that. And so really at a young age, I got to experience what it was like to be picked on for a part of who you were. Not long after we participated in those Native American experiences, my family moved to Southern Illinois, and I still had my long hair. I was entering the 6th grade, and I decided at that moment that I was no longer going to be Native American, frankly because I was going to a new school and I didn't want to be made fun of from those people either. So I ditched that part of my culture. I actually tried to hide it. I was a little embarrassed of it. And I started going by Mexican when someone asked me what's my nationality, because they could look at my skin and know that it's a little darker than normal, so what's my nationality? I told them it was Mexican. Now what I didn't realize is that you could also be made fun of for being Mexican. And so I remember in 6th grade there was this kid named Leif who all the time in PE, he made it his job to let me know that I really didn't fit in. He actually called me 40 weight. Which is a type of oil, and which was a reference to me being a greasy Mexican, and which was a pretty painful part of growing up in middle school. Now, when you put that alongside of my elementary years, I really began to develop a prejudice towards white people, believe it or not. Now, I'm about 3/8 white, half Mexican, about 1/8 Native American, about 3/8 white. And so when I thought about white people, it was really a pejorative term for me. And so that was one thing that I started to develop in my heart, which I'm not really proud of. As a Native American, in that cultural time period, we were taught that the white people are the ones who stole the land from the Native Americans and that we shouldn't appreciate them and shouldn't like them. And then I moved to Southern Illinois, where it's mostly white people. I began to just have a distaste for them. And so one of the things I decided to do was to move to St. Louis, where I knew that there was a lot more diversity and not just a whole bunch of white people. One of the other moments of prejudice that I experienced while living in St. Louis was actually at a Bible college that I attended there, St. Louis Christian College. I was taking a class on African American literature. It was actually in that class where I don't think one of the students knew that I was Mexican, but he was an African American student, and we really got along. We were really good friends. He was an older student, maybe in his 40s or 50s. was talking about the struggle that he has, and the struggle he had was not towards white people, but towards Mexican people. And then he began to talk about all these different stereotypes of Mexican people, that he was just completely against them because of those stereotypes. And it was in that moment I realized, man, even in St. Louis, where it's a black and white issue, there's underlying racism beyond just black and white, but even towards Mexicans as well. The first job I had in St. Louis as a minister even was at Ferguson Christian Church, which is in about half black, half white neighborhood. And part of growing up in that area is that you have a little prejudice towards people who are on the St. Charles side of the river. And one of the things that I knew about me is that I would never do ministry on the St. Charles side of the river, because in my mind it was just a bunch of rich white people who didn't like people like me, who were Mexican, who were Native American, or some of the people in my community that I lived in Ferguson, Missouri. Not long after that, my wife and I, we moved to Chicago area, and it's in the southwest suburbs of Chicago. And we assumed that it would be a diverse area, but what we found out when we got there, that is, it was a suburbs very similar to St. Charles, mostly white, well-off people, and it was there that God began to change our hearts. That's whenever I just decided it doesn't matter what community you live in. It doesn't matter what church you work in. It doesn't matter who you're talking to. Every single person in this world, no matter their skin color, no matter their heritage, they're in need of the loving grace of Jesus Christ and the saving grace of Jesus Christ too. Whether we like to admit it or not, I think all of us have those little hidden dark places in our hearts, and sometimes they're so dark that we can't even see them ourselves. You know, St. Louis has a bad reputation for being a city full of prejudice and racism, and a lot of that is warranted. We have a history that is scattered with racism, but it's not just St. Louis, it's a lot of America too. And so one of my prayers is not just to root the prejudice and racism out of my own heart, but to root a lot of that out of this world, and specifically out of this city. So if you're a Christ follower and you really do believe that Jesus wants to root those kinds of things out of our heart, can you do a favor for me? If you don't mind, just say a little prayer for yourself, but say a little prayer for my heart as well. But here's what I'd really love for you to do. If you love Jesus and you want it to be rooted out, I would love for you to say a prayer for St. Louis, Missouri as well. This is a city that has potential to reach millions of people with the name and the gospel of Jesus. And that starts by letting Jesus root out the darkness in us so that his light can shine here.